The most expensive mistakes are usually hidden behind the most convincing smiles. William Hayes had signed thousands of contracts throughout his career, but on that quiet afternoon inside the private executive dining suite of Chicago's Grand Meridian Hotel, his pen stopped less than an inch above the final signature line without touching the paper. Around the polished walnut conference table, every executive remained perfectly still. Crystal glasses reflected warm afternoon light. Leather portfolios rested beside carefully organized financial reports. The acquisition had been negotiated for nearly 8 months, reviewed by elite attorneys, approved by respected analysts, and praised by international consultants. One final signature would release $150 million before sunset. Every chart looked flawless. Every projection promised extraordinary growth. Every person in the room appeared completely confident. Outside the conference suite, another afternoon unfolded like countless others inside the luxury hotel. Guests arrived with rolling suitcases. Business travelers answered phone calls while crossing the marble lobby. Soft piano music drifted through the air beneath elegant chandeliers. Among the hotel staff moved Claire Morgan, a 26-year-old white waitress wearing a neatly pressed black apron over her crisp white uniform. She carried a polished silver tray with practiced balance, delivering freshly brewed espresso, sparkling water, and delicate pastries to private meetings throughout the hotel. Most executives barely noticed her. That never bothered Claire. Invisible people often heard conversations others ignored. As she approached the conference suite assigned to Williams' investment group, she slowed for only a moment while adjusting a porcelain espresso cup that had shifted slightly on the tray. Just beyond the partially open doorway stood 2 sharply dressed businessmen reviewing documents on a tablet. They spoke quietly, comfortably, believing nobody nearby could possibly understand them. The language was not standard Italian. It was Sicilian. Claire felt her heartbeat slow rather than race. She had not heard that dialect in years, yet every word remained instantly familiar. One man smiled confidently before saying, "Once he signs, every shell company disappears within 2 days." The second man answered with a quiet laugh. He still believes the mining rights are genuine. Claire kept walking without changing her expression. Years earlier, she had learned that surprise often revealed more than silence ever should. She entered the conference suite exactly on schedule, placing fresh coffee before each guest with the calm precision expected inside one of Chicago's finest hotels. Nobody looked at her twice. Nobody except William Hayes, who briefly lifted his eyes as she carefully positioned a porcelain cup beside his right hand. Their eyes met for less than a second. Claire gently adjusted the silver spoon beside his saucer as though completing an ordinary part of her service. Then, without looking directly at him, she whispered 4 words in flawless Sicilian. "This deal is fake." Her voice was barely louder than a breath. She immediately straightened the linen napkin, lifted the now empty tray, and walked toward the exit without hesitation. She did not wait to see his reaction. She did not ask him to believe her. She simply disappeared back into the quiet rhythm of the hotel. Behind her, William's fingers tightened around the expensive fountain pen. For the first time in more than 20 years of negotiating billion-dollar investments, certainty quietly slipped away before a signature could touch the page. William Hayes did not lower the pen immediately. To everyone seated around the conference table, the brief hesitation appeared completely ordinary, the natural pause before approving a transaction worth $150 million. His lead attorney quietly slid the final document a little closer across the polished table, while one investor smiled with calm confidence. Nobody noticed that William's attention had shifted away from the contract entirely, for whispered words continued echoing through his thoughts with remarkable clarity. They had not been spoken in standard Italian. They had been spoken in authentic Sicilian, with the effortless rhythm of someone who had lived with the language rather than studied it. That realization unsettled him more than the warning itself. He slowly placed the fountain pen beside the contract instead of on the signature line. "Before we finalize today's agreement," he said in an even voice, "there is one operational detail I would like clarified." The room remained relaxed. The lead representative answered immediately. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. We are happy to answer any remaining questions." William opened the appendix near the back of the agreement. These regional extraction licenses appear unusually efficient compared with similar projects. How did your team secure approvals so quickly? The representative smiled comfortably. Strong local partnerships. We have spent years building trust in the region. William nodded politely. Impressive. He turned another page without changing his expression. Then perhaps you can explain why two independent operating companies share the same registered office address. For the first time all afternoon, silence lingered slightly longer than expected. One executive adjusted his tie before another answered. Shared administrative services. It reduces operating costs. William acknowledged the explanation with a small nod, yet he noticed something almost invisible. Two men across the table exchanged a quick glance before looking away. Most people would never have seen it. William did. Decades of negotiations had taught him that confidence rarely needed confirmation, but uncertainty often searched the room for reassurance. Outside the conference suite, Claire Morgan quietly returned the empty silver tray to the service station before helping another server prepare afternoon tea service. She folded linen napkins with practiced precision while soft piano music drifted through the hotel lobby. A coworker smiled as she arranged dessert plates beside Claire. That meeting has been going on forever, she said. Claire simply smiled. Some decisions deserve extra time. She said nothing else. She had already done everything her conscience required. Whether the billionaire believed her warning was no longer within her control. Back inside the conference room, William requested a 15-minute recess before signing the agreement. Several representatives appeared surprised, though they quickly disguised their reactions beneath polite smiles. His legal team quietly gathered their notes while assistants refreshed coffee cups. As everyone stood, William walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Reflected in the glass behind him, he observed the room without appearing to watch anyone directly. One representative quietly stepped into the hallway and immediately placed a phone call. Moments later, another joined him. Their voices remained low, but William recognized the same unfamiliar rhythm that had prompted the waitress to speak. He could not understand a single word, yet he no longer dismissed what he did not understand. When the representatives returned, their confident expressions looked carefully maintained rather than effortless. William slowly closed the contract and rested one hand upon its leather cover. For the first time that afternoon, he was no longer asking himself whether the investment was profitable. He was asking whether someone had worked very hard to make every answer appear too perfect. The conference room settled into a silence that felt heavier than any argument. Nobody questioned William Hayes when he requested additional time, but everyone adjusted in small, revealing ways. One executive reached for a glass of water with fingers that no longer appeared completely steady. Another quietly reorganized papers that had already been perfectly aligned. William noticed every detail without allowing his own expression to change. He had spent more than 2 decades studying negotiations, and experience had taught him that confidence usually became quieter under pressure, while deception often became busier. He returned to his seat and opened the thick appendix that most investors rarely examined personally. Page after page listed regional contractors, transportation firms, environmental consultants, and operating partners. At first glance, everything appeared orderly. Then one address caught his attention. A logistics company supposedly responsible for moving millions of dollars of equipment shared the exact office suite with another corporation described as an independent environmental advisor. Williams circled the page lightly with a pencil before continuing. 2 pages later, another company listed a different name but the identical telephone number. It could have been an innocent administrative mistake. Yet, 3 similar inconsistencies rarely happened by coincidence. Across the table, the lead representative maintained his professional smile. "Is there anything we can clarify?" he asked warmly. William looked up calmly. "Possibly. I would appreciate a little more background regarding these operating partners." The representative answered immediately. "They have worked together for many years." William nodded. "Then providing supporting records should be straightforward." The smile remained, although it no longer looked effortless. While the discussion continued, William quietly sent a secure message to his chief compliance officer. He requested immediate independent verification of every company listed in the final appendix, asking his team to compare corporate registrations, physical business locations, and ownership structures before any funds were transferred. The message contained only one additional sentence. Assume nothing. Verify everything. Outside the executive suite, Claire Morgan continued serving guests as though the afternoon held nothing unusual. She replaced fresh flowers near the restaurant entrance, greeted arriving visitors with a gentle smile, and carefully delivered lunch to a family celebrating a graduation. Her coworkers noticed only the same dependable waitress they worked beside every day. One server laughed while carrying dessert plates. "You always stay so calm, even during the busiest shifts." Claire smiled softly. "Busy days still have quiet moments if you pay attention." She returned to the kitchen before anyone asked what she meant. Back inside the conference room, William's phone vibrated once. His compliance officer had already begun responding. Preliminary searches revealed that 2 companies involved in the acquisition had updated their ownership records only 3 weeks earlier despite claiming decades of stable operations. Another listed headquarters at a commercial office building known primarily for virtual business registrations. None of those findings proved dishonesty by themselves, but together they created a pattern impossible to ignore. William slowly closed the appendix and folded his hands. Around him, expensive watches reflected the afternoon light, while polished shoes rested upon imported carpet and carefully prepared presentations waited beside untouched coffee cups. Everything in the room still looked perfect. Yet William understood something that had not existed 1 hour earlier. Perfection was no longer reassuring. It had become the very reason he intended to keep searching until every polished answer revealed the truth hiding beneath it. William Hayes remained remarkably composed, yet the atmosphere inside the executive conference suite had changed in ways that no financial report could explain. The polished presentation continued exactly as planned. Charts filled the large display. Revenue forecasts stretched confidently across the screen. Every sentence sounded carefully prepared. Even so, William no longer evaluated the numbers alone. He watched the people presenting them. Every slight hesitation carried meaning. Every exchanged glance became another piece of evidence. "Gentlemen," William said with an easy smile, "would you mind explaining one more operational detail?" The lead representative nodded immediately. "Certainly." William turned the binder toward him. "This transportation contractor and this environmental consulting company appear to share not only an office address, but also the same registered contact number. Was that part of the original organizational structure?" The representative looked down for only a brief moment before answering. "A temporary administrative arrangement. It simplified regional coordination." William nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate the explanation." He asked nothing more, allowing the silence to settle naturally. Across the table, another executive quietly reached for his coffee before realizing the cup was empty. His hand stopped halfway. A second representative adjusted his tie, although the room remained comfortably cool. William had seen similar reactions many times before. Honest people usually clarified details. Nervous people often became occupied with themselves. At that same moment, his phone vibrated softly beneath the table. A secure message from his compliance director appeared on the screen. Preliminary verification had uncovered additional inconsistencies. One supplier listed more employees than the office building could reasonably accommodate. Another corporation had amended its ownership structure less than 1 month earlier despite claiming decades of uninterrupted operations. William locked the phone without reacting. The investigation had only begun, yet every answer seemed to produce another unanswered question. Outside the conference suite, Claire Morgan quietly replaced fresh coffee beans behind the restaurant counter before helping another server prepare afternoon service. Sunlight poured through the tall windows overlooking the Chicago River, filling the dining room with a warm, golden glow. Guests laughed softly over business lunches while hotel staff moved with practiced precision between elegant tables. Claire welcomed each visitor with the same calm smile. She never glanced toward the conference room. She had already accepted that whatever happened next no longer belonged to her. One coworker noticed her thoughtful expression while folding linen napkins. "Long day?" she asked kindly. Claire smiled gently. "Important days usually are." The coworker laughed. "You always make difficult days sound simple." Claire quietly arranged another place setting. Most difficult decisions begin with small details. Back inside the conference room, William closed the presentation binder and looked around the table with calm confidence. "I believe we should postpone today's signing until my team completes one final independent verification." The words landed gently, yet they transformed the entire room. The lead representative forced a courteous smile. Mr. Hayes, delaying the agreement could create unnecessary complications. William's expression remained warm. If the opportunity is genuine, 48 more hours will not diminish its value. No one immediately answered. The polished certainty that had defined the meeting all afternoon slowly faded into careful restraint. William rested the unsigned contract inside his leather portfolio instead of reaching for his pen. At that moment, he understood that the quiet waitress had not given him proof. She had given him something far more valuable. She had given him a reason to ask one more question before making the most expensive mistake of his career. 48 hours began with remarkable silence. William Hayes did not issue public statements, cancel press appearances, or explain his decision to anyone outside his closest legal and compliance teams. Instead, he allowed experienced investigators to do what they did best. Every company listed in the proposed acquisition received a fresh review from the beginning, as though nobody had ever examined the documents before. Offices were contacted directly. Public records were compared across multiple jurisdictions. Corporate ownership filings were traced layer by layer instead of accepting convenient summaries prepared by outside consultants. By the end of the first morning, the first unusual pattern appeared. 3 supposedly independent suppliers listed different corporate names, but shared identical filing histories, matching administrative contacts, and remarkably similar registration timelines. None of those facts alone proved deception, yet together they suggested careful coordination hidden beneath respectable paperwork. William read every report personally. He never rushed his analysts. He simply asked one question after another. What else? Across the city, Claire Morgan arrived for another shift at the Grand Meridian Hotel before sunrise. She tied her black apron neatly around her waist, greeted the kitchen staff with her usual warm smile, and began preparing the restaurant for breakfast service. Fresh flowers replaced yesterday's arrangements. Crystal glasses reflected the first light of morning. Coffee filled the dining room with its familiar aroma. Nothing about her routine hinted that a billion-dollar investment team was now rebuilding an investigation because of 4 quiet words she had whispered 2 days earlier. One coworker noticed Claire reading a small paperback during her break. "You always seem to enjoy learning something new," she said with a smile. Claire gently closed the book. "Every language teaches you another way to notice the world." Her coworker laughed. "I can barely manage English." Claire smiled kindly. Listening matters more than speaking. She returned to work before the conversation could become anything larger. Back inside Hayes Capital Partners, another report reached William shortly after lunch. Investigators had confirmed that one registered mining operation occupied land where no commercial extraction equipment had ever been recorded. A second operating partner claimed years of production despite having received its primary business license only months earlier. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Several companies connected to the transaction ultimately traced back through different holding corporations to the same hidden ownership network. The structure had been intentionally layered to appear independent while quietly remaining connected. William leaned back in his chair and looked out across the Chicago skyline. He understood immediately what the evidence meant. The transaction had not merely contained isolated mistakes. It had been designed to survive ordinary due diligence by appearing more organized than genuine businesses usually were. His chief compliance officer entered the office carrying one final folder. "We have enough to recommend terminating the acquisition completely," she said. William accepted the folder without opening it immediately. "Prepare the board meeting." She nodded. "Everyone will ask what changed." William looked once more toward the city before answering quietly. "Nothing changed. We simply started asking the right questions." At that moment, he realized the greatest value Claire had provided was never the warning itself. It was the courage to interrupt certainty before certainty became irreversible. The Hayes Capital Partners boardroom overlooked the Chicago skyline, yet nobody admired the view that morning. Every director had received the final investigative report only. Minutes earlier, thick binders rested unopened before some, while others stared at highlighted pages with quiet disbelief. William Hayes entered without ceremony, carrying a single leather portfolio instead of the mountain of documents that had accompanied the original acquisition. He took his seat at the head of the table and allowed the silence to settle before speaking. "Thank you for reviewing the report," he said calmly. "You already know my recommendation." No one interrupted. The board members had spent decades evaluating complex investments, but even they appeared surprised by how thoroughly the proposed transaction had unraveled once independent verification began. The chief compliance officer stood and displayed a simple organizational chart on the large presentation screen. Gone were the colorful revenue projections and polished marketing materials presented by the sellers. In their place appeared a network of interconnected companies linked through hidden ownership structures, recently amended registrations, shared administrative offices, and conflicting operational records. "The evidence is consistent," she explained. The organizations were presented as independent entities, but multiple layers ultimately connect back to the same controlling interests. Several supporting claims could not be independently verified. William listened quietly while every director studied the chart. No dramatic reactions followed. Experienced leaders rarely expressed surprise loudly. Instead, they absorbed difficult truths before responding. Finally, one senior board member closed his binder and looked toward William. "If we had completed the transaction, what would have happened?" William answered honestly. "We would have spent years untangling obligations built upon information that never deserved our confidence." Another director slowly nodded. "Then the recommendation is clear." One by one, every board member voted to terminate the acquisition permanently. The decision was unanimous. No celebration followed. Saving $150 million felt less like a victory than the avoidance of a costly mistake. When the meeting concluded, several executives quietly thanked the compliance team before leaving the room. William remained behind for a few extra moments, looking once more at the now-dark presentation screen. He understood that the investigation had uncovered far more than a flawed investment. It had exposed a weakness in the way even experienced professionals sometimes trusted polished appearances too quickly. Across the city, Claire Morgan moved through another ordinary afternoon inside the Grand Meridian Hotel. She greeted returning guests by name, recommended desserts to a family celebrating a birthday, and patiently helped an elderly visitor find the correct banquet room for a reunion luncheon. Her black apron looked exactly as it had every other day. Her routine remained unchanged. During a short break, she stood near a tall window overlooking the river while sipping a cup of tea. The autumn breeze stirred the trees outside, carrying golden leaves across the sidewalk below. Claire thought briefly about the businessman she had warned several days earlier. She wondered whether he had ignored her words or simply forgotten them. Then she smiled to herself and returned to work. She had never expected to know the ending. Back inside his office, William opened a blank sheet of stationery instead of another financial report. He rested his fountain pen above the page, remembering the exact moment it had stopped above the contract without touching the paper. This time he wrote only one sentence before setting the pen down again. "Some voices become valuable because they speak softly enough to make us choose whether we are truly listening." He folded the page carefully, already knowing exactly who deserved to receive it. 3 days later, William Hayes returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel without assistants, attorneys, or security. He arrived in the same charcoal suit he had worn during the failed acquisition, yet this visit carried none of the urgency of corporate negotiations. He entered through the revolving doors just after the lunch crowd had begun to thin, allowing the familiar sound of quiet conversations and soft piano music to replace the constant rhythm of conference calls that usually filled his afternoons. The marble lobby looked exactly as he remembered. Guests checked into elegant rooms. Families gathered beside large windows overlooking the Chicago River. Hotel employees moved with practiced precision through another ordinary day. William requested a table in the main restaurant instead of a private dining suite. He wanted to see the place as every other guest experienced it. A few minutes later, Claire Morgan approached carrying a menu and a glass of ice water. Her black apron was neatly pressed. Her expression remained calm and welcoming. There was no sign that she recognized him immediately, or perhaps she simply believed every guest deserved the same professional courtesy. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "Welcome." William smiled politely. "Good afternoon." She placed the menu before him with steady hands. "May I bring you today's special, or would you like a few minutes?" "A few minutes would be perfect," William answered. Claire nodded and quietly continued to another table without asking another question. William watched as she moved naturally through the dining room, greeting each customer with equal patience. She remembered one elderly gentleman's favorite tea without writing it down. She helped a young family find extra seating for their children before anyone requested assistance. She thanked the kitchen staff every time a plate reached the service counter. Nothing she did appeared extraordinary, yet everything reflected the same quiet consistency that had led her to whisper those 4 words instead of remaining silent. After lunch, Claire returned to clear the table. William looked up with a grateful smile. "May I ask you something?" Claire nodded gently. "Of course." William rested both hands beside his empty coffee cup. "How did you recognize the dialect so quickly?" Claire paused briefly before answering. "When I was 12 years old, my parents accepted restoration work near Palermo. We expected to stay one summer. We remained nearly 5 years." William listened without interrupting. Claire continued quietly. "Our closest neighbors were an elderly Sicilian couple. They insisted I learn the local dialect instead of formal Italian, because they believed language carried history, trust, and character. They said people revealed their true thoughts most easily in the words that felt like home." William slowly nodded. Suddenly the warning made complete sense. Claire had not merely translated a conversation. She had understood its confidence, its rhythm, and the careless certainty of people convinced nobody nearby belonged inside their world. "You could have said nothing," William observed softly. Claire smiled almost imperceptibly. "I thought about that. What changed your mind?" She looked toward the sunlight reflecting across the river before answering. "I realized I would remember my silence much longer than I would remember my fear." William remained quiet for several seconds. During a career filled with billion-dollar negotiations, he had heard countless speeches about leadership, ethics, and responsibility. None had carried more weight than that single sentence spoken by a waitress who expected nothing in return. At that moment, he understood the greatest gift she had offered was never her knowledge of Sicilian. It was her willingness to act when honesty demanded courage and recognition was never guaranteed. William finished his coffee slowly, not because he wanted to prolong the conversation, but because he understood that moments like this could not be rushed. Claire excused herself to serve another table, returning naturally to the rhythm of the dining room without waiting for gratitude or recognition. William watched as she welcomed a young couple celebrating an anniversary, carefully adjusted an elderly guest's chair before he sat down, and quietly replaced a child's spilled glass of water with a fresh one before the parents even realized what had happened. Every gesture reflected the same thoughtful awareness that had changed the course of an investment worth $150 million. She treated every person with identical respect, whether they wore expensive watches or ordinary jackets. Status never influenced her kindness. After several minutes, Claire returned to refill William's coffee cup. He thanked her with a genuine smile. "There is something else I have been wondering," he said. Claire looked at him attentively. "Yes." William folded his hands on the table. "Did you ever think about contacting someone afterward to find out what happened?" Claire gently shook her head. "No." William appeared surprised. "Not even once." She smiled softly. "If I had warned you only because I wanted to know the ending, then I would have been helping myself instead of helping someone else." William remained silent. Her answer carried the same quiet honesty as every word she had spoken before. She continued, "Sometimes we never learn how our choices affect other people. That does not make those choices any less important." William looked through the tall restaurant windows toward the Chicago River flowing steadily beneath the afternoon sunlight. During his career, he had measured success through completed projects, profitable investments, and measurable outcomes. Claire seemed to measure life differently. For her, doing the right thing did not depend upon knowing the result. It depended only upon making the right decision when the opportunity appeared. At another table nearby, a little boy accidentally dropped his fork onto the floor. Before his parents could react, Claire quietly appeared with a clean replacement and a warm smile that made the child laugh instead of feeling embarrassed. She wished the family an enjoyable meal before moving effortlessly toward another guest requesting tea. William noticed something remarkable. She never hurried, yet she somehow always arrived exactly when someone needed her attention. The dining room remained busy, but calm seemed to follow wherever she walked. Before leaving, William reached inside his leather portfolio and removed the folded sheet of stationery he had written several days earlier. He placed it inside a simple envelope without any company logo or business card. "This belongs to you," he said quietly. Claire accepted the envelope with both hands, looking slightly puzzled. "Thank you." William smiled. "Please read it after your shift." She nodded politely and slipped the envelope into the pocket of her black apron without opening it. There were still guests waiting to be served, coffee cups, needing refills, and meals arriving from the kitchen. Her responsibilities came first. William stood, thanked her once more, and walked toward the hotel lobby. As the revolving doors closed behind him, he realized he had entered the restaurant hoping to thank the woman who had protected his company. Instead, he was leaving with a deeper lesson about character than any boardroom, university, or leadership seminar had ever taught him. Some people changed the world through speeches. Others changed it with 4 whispered words and a lifetime of quiet integrity. Claire finished her evening shift nearly an hour after the last business dinner concluded. The dining room had grown quiet, the soft piano music replaced by the gentle sound of employees preparing for the next morning. Only then did she remember the envelope resting inside the pocket of her black apron. She sat alone for a moment in the small employee lounge beside a window overlooking the city lights and carefully opened it. Inside, she found a handwritten letter on thick cream-colored stationery. There was no company logo, no elaborate signature, and no formal business language. The message was simple. "You reminded me that the most valuable people in any room are not always the ones speaking the loudest. Thank you for giving me the courage to ask one more question before certainty became irreversible. William Hayes." Folded beneath the letter rested a finely crafted leather bookmark embossed with 5 words. "Always listen before deciding." Claire quietly smiled. There was no large reward enclosed. No expensive gift. No invitation to leave her job. Somehow that made the gesture feel even more sincere. She carefully placed the bookmark inside the novel she carried during lunch breaks and folded the letter back into its envelope before placing both inside her locker. The following morning, life resumed exactly as it always had. Fresh flowers arrived before sunrise. Coffee filled the restaurant with its familiar aroma. Travelers checked out while new guests checked in. Claire tied her black apron, greeted the kitchen staff with a warm smile, and began another ordinary shift. Nobody looking around the dining room would have guessed that the waitress carrying breakfast trays had quietly protected one of the largest investment firms in the country only days earlier. Across town, William arrived at Hayes Capital Partners for the weekly executive leadership meeting. Senior managers gathered around the long conference table expecting discussions about new investments and market forecasts. Instead, William began with a different subject. "Before we review financial performance," he said calmly, "I want to discuss how we make decisions." The room became quiet. William continued, "From today forward, every employee in this company has permission to question assumptions regardless of title or seniority. If something feels inconsistent, I expect you to speak. Good judgment does not belong exclusively to executives." Several directors exchanged thoughtful glances. One younger analyst sitting near the end of the table looked genuinely surprised. William noticed and smiled slightly. The next great observation may come from someone nobody expects. Nobody in the room knew exactly what experience had inspired those words, yet every person understood their importance. A new habit slowly began taking shape inside the company. Junior analysts asked more thoughtful questions. Senior managers listened more carefully before dismissing concerns. Meetings became less about proving confidence and more about discovering truth. William never mentioned Claire's name publicly. He believed genuine integrity deserved protection rather than attention. Meanwhile, Claire continued welcoming guests with the same quiet grace she had always shown, never realizing that inside boardrooms across the city, people she would never meet had started listening more carefully because of a decision she made in a hotel hallway. Sometimes the greatest influence leaves no headlines, no applause, and no public recognition. Sometimes it simply changes how good people choose to hear one another from that day forward. Weeks passed quietly, and the canceled acquisition gradually disappeared from financial headlines, replaced by new market reports and fresh corporate announcements. Inside Hayes Capital Partners, however, the impact continued to grow in ways no newspaper could measure. During investment meetings, William Hayes noticed something different. Junior analysts who once remained silent now felt comfortable asking difficult questions. Experienced executives paused before dismissing unusual observations. The atmosphere inside the boardroom became less about defending assumptions and more about discovering the truth together. William encouraged every conversation with the same calm attention. Whenever someone apologized for raising a concern, he answered with the same sentence. Questions protect decisions. Those 3 words slowly became part of the company's culture. Across the city, Claire Morgan continued her life exactly as she always had. Every morning she arrived before the breakfast rush, tied her black apron neatly around her waist, checked every table setting, polished crystal glasses until they reflected the morning light, and greeted each guest with genuine warmth. Business executives, vacationing families, elderly couples, and first-time visitors all received the same quiet respect. Wealth never impressed her. Titles never intimidated her. She believed everyone deserved to feel welcome long before the first cup of coffee reached the table. One rainy afternoon, while arranging fresh flowers near the restaurant entrance, Claire noticed an elderly gentleman searching the lobby with a slightly confused expression. She walked over immediately and asked whether he needed assistance. He smiled gratefully after realizing he had entered through the wrong ballroom entrance for a family reunion taking place upstairs. Claire personally escorted him to the correct elevator and wished him a wonderful afternoon before returning to work without expecting thanks. A coworker watched the interaction and smiled. You always notice people before they ask for help. Claire adjusted another flower arrangement and answered softly. Sometimes people hope someone notices before they have to ask. Later that same week, William visited one of his regional offices to meet new employees. During the orientation session, a young analyst hesitated before pointing out a small inconsistency inside a financial projection prepared by a senior manager. The room became quiet. Instead of correcting the analyst for interrupting, William invited him to explain every detail. After reviewing the documents together, the team discovered that a simple reporting assumption required revision. It was not a major problem, but it prevented future confusion. As the meeting ended, William thanked the analyst in front of everyone. Never underestimate careful observation, he said. Good judgment is built one honest question at a time. Driving back through downtown Chicago that evening, William found himself passing the Grand Meridian Hotel once again. He slowed briefly at the traffic light, looking toward the familiar entrance where guests arrived carrying luggage, business portfolios, and ordinary expectations. Somewhere inside, Claire was almost certainly serving dinner exactly as she had the week before, unaware that her quiet decision continued shaping conversations far beyond the walls of the hotel. William smiled to himself before the traffic light turned green. Success had once meant completing another profitable acquisition. Now it also meant creating an environment where the quietest voice in the room never felt afraid to speak. That lesson had become far more valuable than the $150 million his company had never spent. Winter arrived quietly across Chicago, covering the city with crisp mornings and early sunsets while life continued moving at its familiar pace. Inside Hayes Capital Partners, William Hayes noticed changes that could not be measured on financial statements. Board meetings had become noticeably different. Analysts who once hesitated now spoke with quiet confidence. Senior executives listened longer before responding. When disagreements emerged, they no longer treated them as obstacles, but as opportunities to uncover stronger answers. William watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. He never reminded anyone about the canceled acquisition. He never repeated the story behind the company's cultural change. Instead, he simply continued rewarding honesty wherever it appeared. During one investment review, a recently hired associate respectfully questioned a small assumption hidden inside a market projection prepared by a far more experienced department head. Rather than dismissing the concern, William invited the young employee to explain every observation. After several minutes, the team discovered a forecasting variable that required correction. The adjustment prevented a costly misunderstanding months before it could become a real problem. When the meeting ended, William thanked both employees equally. Experience deserved respect, but thoughtful observation deserved it as well. Across the city, Claire Morgan began another evening shift at the Grand Meridian Hotel exactly as she had countless times before. She tied her black apron neatly around her waist, greeted the chefs by name, arranged polished silverware beneath the warm dining room lights, and welcomed each arriving guest with the same calm smile. She never treated kindness as something reserved for special occasions. It was simply the way she believed people should meet one another. One evening, a young waitress nervously approached Claire before service began. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Claire nodded with encouragement. "Of course." The younger employee looked embarrassed. "How do you always stay calm when important guests arrive?" "I worry about making mistakes." Claire smiled gently while placing folded napkins onto a serving cart. "Do not think about important guests. Think about people. When you remember they are simply people, your work becomes much easier." The young waitress considered those words before smiling with visible relief. She thanked Claire and walked toward the dining room with renewed confidence. Claire returned to arranging the final table without realizing she had quietly passed another lesson forward. Later that night, William attended a charity dinner hosted inside the very same hotel. The ballroom was filled with civic leaders, educators, and local business owners supporting scholarships for first-generation college students. During his brief remarks, William spoke about leadership, responsibility, and trust. Near the end of his speech, he paused for a moment before adding one final thought. "Some of the wisest advice I have ever received came from someone whose job title gave no hint of how extraordinary that person truly was. Never underestimate quiet integrity." The audience responded with warm applause, unaware that the person inspiring those words was working only a few hallways away, serving coffee and welcoming guests with the same humble grace she had shown every day. Claire never heard the speech. She was helping an elderly couple celebrate their anniversary with a simple dessert and 2 extra spoons. Yet without knowing it, her quiet courage continued reaching people she would never meet, proving once again that the strongest influence often travels farther than the person who first set it into motion. Several months passed, and the memory of the abandoned acquisition quietly settled into the background of everyday life. Yet its influence continued expanding in ways neither William Hayes nor Claire Morgan could fully see. Hayes Capital Partners entered the new year with renewed confidence, not because the company had completed another extraordinary investment, but because it had learned to value careful listening as highly as financial expertise. During annual performance reviews, managers began recognizing employees who demonstrated thoughtful judgment rather than simply rewarding rapid decisions. Young analysts no longer hesitated before asking difficult questions. Experienced executives welcomed fresh perspectives instead of defending old assumptions. William often watched these conversations unfold with quiet satisfaction. Every thoughtful discussion reminded him that the greatest return from the canceled transaction had never appeared on a balance sheet. Across the city, Claire continued living with the same quiet rhythm that had always guided her. She arrived before sunrise, tied her familiar black apron neatly around her waist, checked every table's setting with careful attention, greeted the kitchen staff by name, and welcomed each guest with genuine warmth. She never spoke about the billionaire she had once warned. She never mentioned the letter resting safely inside her locker. The leather bookmark remained inside the novel she carried during lunch breaks, appearing whenever she paused to read a few pages before returning to work. It had become a quiet reminder that simple honesty could travel farther than anyone expected. One snowy afternoon, the hotel's general manager approached Claire after the lunch service had ended. He smiled warmly before handing her a small envelope. "This is from the Employee Recognition Committee," he explained. Claire opened it carefully and found a handwritten note thanking her for the consistent kindness she showed guests and coworkers throughout the year. Along with the note came recognition as the hotel's Employee of the Year, chosen not because of one remarkable event, but because dozens of guests and fellow employees had independently described the same qualities: patience, integrity, attentiveness, and quiet professionalism. Claire accepted the recognition with humble gratitude, thanking the committee before returning almost immediately to help another server prepare for the evening guests. Nothing about her routine changed. She believed appreciation should encourage responsibility rather than replace it. That same evening, William reviewed the annual charitable initiatives supported by his foundation. As he approved scholarships, educational grants, and community partnerships, he paused beside a new program designed to provide language education for students from working families. He smiled quietly before signing the authorization. Learning another language had once seemed like an academic achievement. Now he understood it could become a bridge capable of protecting lives, opportunities, and trust in ways nobody could predict. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently across the Chicago skyline, while lights reflected against the river below. Inside, two very different buildings, one Billionaire and one Waitress, finished another ordinary day without realizing how deeply their lives had become connected by a single moment of courage. Neither expected applause. Neither searched for recognition. Yet both carried forward the same quiet lesson. The future is often changed not by the loudest voice in the room, but by the person willing to notice one overlooked detail and speak with honesty before it is too late. 1 year later, the first warm days of spring returned to Chicago, carrying fresh light across the river and filling the Grand Meridian Hotel with travelers beginning new journeys. Inside the restaurant, everything appeared comfortably familiar. Crystal glasses reflected the morning sun. Fresh flowers decorated every table. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room while guests shared quiet conversations over breakfast. Claire Morgan tied her black apron exactly as she had hundreds of times before and welcomed the first visitors with the same gentle smile that had never depended upon who walked through the door. Success had not changed her. Recognition had not changed her. She still believed every guest deserved patience, dignity, and sincere attention. Across town, Hayes Capital Partners celebrated another successful year. Yet William Hayes found himself thinking less about the company's financial growth than about the culture that had quietly transformed inside its walls. Employees now challenged assumptions without fear. Managers listened before judging. New ideas were welcomed regardless of where they originated. During the annual leadership gathering, one executive asked William what had become the most important lesson of his career. The room expected him to mention discipline, timing, or investment strategy. Instead, he smiled thoughtfully before answering. Never confuse position with wisdom. The person who protects your future may never sit at your conference table. The room remained silent for a moment before every executive slowly nodded. Those words became the closing message of the meeting. Later that afternoon, William walked through downtown Chicago without a schedule for the first time in weeks. Almost without thinking, he entered the familiar hotel and ordered a simple cup of coffee. Claire happened to be serving that section of the restaurant. She greeted him with the same warm professionalism she offered every guest. "Good afternoon. It is nice to see you again." William smiled. "It is good to be back." There was nothing more either of them needed to prove. The gratitude had already been expressed. The lesson had already been learned. Claire placed the coffee before him with steady hands and quietly continued serving the surrounding tables. William watched as she comforted a nervous traveler searching for a meeting room, congratulated a young couple celebrating their engagement, and patiently helped an elderly guest read the menu without making him feel embarrassed. Every small act reflected the same quiet character that had once changed the course of his life. Before leaving, William placed payment beneath the check and stood beside the table for one final moment. "Thank you," he said simply. Claire answered with the same peaceful smile. "You are always welcome." He walked toward the revolving doors while sunlight poured through the tall glass entrance, illuminating the marble floor exactly as it had on the afternoon when everything began. Claire watched him leave only briefly before returning to another waiting guest. Life continued. Coffee was poured. Conversations began. New stories quietly entered the hotel every day. Yet somewhere inside those ordinary moments lived a truth neither of them would ever forget. Wealth can open doors. Knowledge can solve problems. Experience can build success. But the future often changes because one ordinary person chooses honesty over comfort, courage over silence, and integrity over recognition. The quietest voice in the room is sometimes the one worth hearing most.